On this show, we compare the best parts of our childhoods and argue which decade was better, the 80s or the 90s.
In this episode, we'll be discussing which decade's genre of music was better, 80s hair metal or 90s grunge, the history of 1986 versus 1996, and if the 1980s clothes fad Underoos would fly today.
Which decade was better? You can help us decide.
So stick around for this episode of 10 Years Apart.
We're going back, way back. It's the 10 Years Apart podcast.
80s versus 90s.
With Adam and Scott.
Welcome to the 10 Years Apart podcast. I'm Scott, one of the hosts of the show, and I'm joined by my co-host, Adam. Adam, how's it going?
It's going very well, thank you.
So this podcast is all about comparing our childhoods. My childhood was growing up during the 80s and Adam during the 90s, making us 10 years apart.
In this episode, we are going to be comparing which decade's music genre was better, hair metal or grunge.
I'll argue for the hair metal genre, as well as some of my favorite hair metal bands from the 1980s, and Adam will argue for the grunge genre and some of his favorite bands, or grunge bands, from the 1990s.
Then we'll debate on which music genre was better, and you can also vote which genre of music was your favorite from those decades.
You can vote right here if you're watching us on YouTube by clicking on the poll in the top right corner, or you can vote on any of our social media at 10 Years Apart Pod, or by visiting our website at 10yearsapart.com.
After we get through our debate on hair metal or grunge, we'll also have our segment which we call Does It Fly Today?, where we look at a movie, song, or product from either the 1980s or 1990s and discuss why we think it faded away and if we think it would hold up today.
On this episode, we'll be looking back at the 1980s clothing fad, Underoos, and asking, would that fly today?
That will be a little later on, so stick around for that too. And before we get into our hair metal or grunge debate, we're going to start off with the first segment which we call A Year from Our Past.
A Year from Our Past.
In A Year from Our Past, we'll be doing a brief history look back at a year from each decade and what we remember from those years.
So Scott will be looking at 1986, and I'll be covering 1996.
And I'll get it started with 1986. So some popular movies that came out in 1986, we had Critters, Crocodile Dundee, Back to School, The Golden Child, Invaders from Mars, Maximum Overdrive, Pretty in Pink, Labyrinth, Stand By Me, Highlander, The Fly, Platoon, Aliens, and Top Gun. The best picture from the Academy Awards for 1986 was Platoon, and the highest grossing movie from 1986 was Top Gun, with $356.8 million worldwide.
Some popular movies that were released in 1996 were Mission Impossible, Twister, Independence Day, Trainspotting, Jerry Maguire, Fargo, Scream, The Rock, Mars Attacks, Sling Blade, Swingers, The People vs. Larry Flint, The English Patient, and From Dusk Till Dawn. The film that won Best Picture at the Oscars that year was The English Patient, and the highest grossing movie was Independence Day with a worldwide gross of $306,169,255.
So both decades, or both years, had some great movies. Some movies that I loved. From 86, I mean, there are a lot of good comedies, like Crocodile Dundee, Back to School, The Golden Child, that was with Eddie Murphy. I don't know if you saw or remember that movie.
I didn't see that, no.
Pretty in Pink was pretty popular, but some of my favorite movies were more in the horror genre. I liked Maximum Overdrive. It's a movie a lot of people don't like from Stephen King and thought it was kind of corny, but I actually really liked that movie.
Was that one directed by Stephen King? Or?
I don't know if he directed it or if it was he might have. He was definitely made a cameo in the movie.
Yes.
He was one of the guys that goes up to an ATM machine and it calls him an asshole.
Okay.
The Fly, I'm actually not a huge fan of The Fly, although that's David Cronenberg, maybe?
Yeah, Canadian director.
It's one of his most famous movies, but it wasn't bad. It just wasn't my type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Aliens was one of my favorite movies of that franchise.
Do you think it's better than...
I actually
First?
like it better than the first one.
Okay.
I know the first one is maybe better and a lot more creepier, but I've always found that movie a bit slow.
Yeah, Aliens, the second one it seems a lot more action-packed.
Yeah, it's more of an action movie than
Right.
a horror, sci-fi horror. Top Gun is obviously very popular. I mean, again, that wasn't a movie that I cared for that much, but had a big following, and I think the sequel is coming out this year, or this coming year.
Mm-hmm.
The Best Picture, Platoon, I really enjoyed that movie, and I saw The English Patient. I think between those two, I like Platoon better.
I'd have to agree with that.
I guess The English Patient is more of a romance.
Yeah.
They both deal with war, but two different types of genre of movies.
Yes.
1996 movies, Mission Impossible, I didn't care for at all. I found it hard to follow. I actually like the second one better than the first one, even though a lot of people didn't care for that one.
I think the most recent ones are way better than the first one or two.
Trainspotting, yeah, it was all right. I mean, I think it probably really is a good movie. I haven't watched it since I saw it, but I thought it was pretty just kind of depressing.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Maguire, really did enjoy that movie.
Yep.
Scream was, Wes Craven's kind of mock on the horror genre, and just thought that was a really good movie. Not necessarily some of the sequels, but when Scream came out, that was a big thing.
It's kind of a comeback for Wes Craven in many ways.
The People vs. Larry Flint, I really enjoyed that movie. All the actors in it. I even liked Courtney Love in the movie.
Yeah, she's really good in that.
And From Dusk Till Dawn, I didn't really care for that movie. I just thought it was kind of a silly action horror.
Mm-hmm.
Both years had pretty good movies. I enjoyed a lot of them.
Yeah, the movies from 1986, I'd have to say I really enjoyed Labyrinth as a kid. Remember watching that with my sister. Stand By Me was pretty entertaining. I'd still watch that to this day.
Yeah, Stand By Me is probably one of Stephen King's best movies.
Yeah, and it had a lot of budding stars at the time, like Kiefer Sutherland.
River Phoenix, I think.
River Phoenix. They got that little fat kid, Vern, who was like Jerry O'Connell, went on to do some pretty good things with his career. I know you don't really appreciate The Fly. I think The Fly is one of my favorite horror movies. I really love David Cronenberg. I really like, some of the special effects, or, like the practical effects, I should say, they use in that film. Platoon is a great war movie. I love Aliens too. I think I appreciate Alien, the first one, a little bit more, even though I do agree with you, it is a little bit more slow moving. I've never seen Top Gun, which is kind of strange because I fancy myself a movie buff, but yeah, I never saw that one. For the 1996 movies, I liked a lot of these when they came out. Really enjoyed seeing Twister in the theater, Independence Day. Trainspotting, yeah, it's a really dark movie, but I think it's really, really hard-hitting kind of drama coming out of Scotland. Thought Fargo was excellent. Jerry Maguire was pretty good, I thought. Scream was really unique, kind of like popularized the horror genre again in the 1990s. I think they kind of faded away, but then this kind of had like a big comeback, and you have the subsequent kind of movies that tried to emulate them, like I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend and things like that. The Rock was a decent action film. I love Sling Blade. I thought it was really good. And I agree with you. The People versus Larry Flint was good. English Patient's really boring. And Dusk Till Dawn. From Dusk Till Dawn, I thought it was kind of, like you said, kind of stupid, kind of silly. So yeah, I think both years had some decent films. I enjoyed a lot of them.
And some hit music from 1986. We had the Bangles with Walk Like an Egyptian. Van Halen, Why Can't This Be Love? Madonna, Papa Don't Preach. Bon Jovi, You Give Love a Bad Name. Lionel Richie, Dancing on the Ceiling. Glass Tiger, Don't Forget Me When I'm Gone. And Cyndi Lauper with True Colors. The song of the year for the Billboard's Top 100 was That's What Friends Are For from Dion and Friends. And the song of the year for the Grammys was Higher Love by Steve Winwood.
Some hit music coming out of 1996 included Tracy Chapman's Give Me One Reason, Celine Dion's Because You Loved Me, Alanis Morissette with Ironic, Eric Clapton's Change the World, the Tony Rich Project with Nobody Knows, Gin Blossom's hit song Follow You Down, Joan Osborne with One of Us, Los Del Rio with Macarena. The top song from the Billboard Top 100 was Macarena, and the song that walked away with Best Song at the Grammys was Change the World by Eric Clapton.
Some of the music from 1996 I do remember. I don't know if I know Change the World by Eric Clapton. Not sure if I know that one. Maybe if I heard it. I did like Joan Osborne's One of Us. Kinda anyway. Tracy Chapman, I didn't mind her as a singer. Not a Celine Dion fan, even though she's Canadian. Alanis Morissette, I did like that album. I think that album anyway.
Jagged Little Pill.
But I recall her from the 80s where she was like a hip-hop dancer, singer.
Yeah, I didn't know that until actually recently somebody pointed it out.
And some of the 1986 songs and also albums. I mean, these are songs from albums, but a lot of these albums had great songs like Bon Jovi's You Give Love a Bad Name. That had a lot of hit songs like Living on a Prayer and songs like that came from that year. Glass Tiger was a Canadian band that most people probably wouldn't know outside of the country. Cyndi Lauper, I was a Cyndi Lauper fan throughout the 80s. The Bangles, Walk Like an Egyptian, that was a pretty popular song. And I'm a big Van Halen fan.
Yeah, the 1986 music doesn't really stick out for me too much, aside from the Bon Jovi song. And, the 1996 songs, yeah, I remember all of these. I really liked, Alanis Morissette. I think me and my sister and my parents, really enjoyed her music. My mother really loved Celine Dion, but I couldn't really stand her. And the song that really sticks out for me from 1996 was Macarena, just because everyone did that stupid dance. And you'd go to a wedding or like a Jack and Jill or something like that, and everyone would line up and do the stupid
So
moves.
sticks out in a bad way.
Yeah, it's kind of an annoying song. I do remember the Eric Clapton song Change the World. It's a pretty good song.
And in TV news and other events for 1986... In TV, we had the Oprah Winfrey Show debuted on national TV for the first time. And the TV show Elf debuts in September of this year. Some popular toys from 1986. The Omnibot 2000 came out. And My Buddy Doll, which I think either Child's Play was a ripoff from, or vice versa. Some technical breakthroughs from 1986. We had the largest space station up until that point. The Mir space station was launched into orbit from the Soviet Union. And Richard Branson's boat, the Virgin Challenger 2, breaks the world record for crossing the Atlantic Ocean. And some news events from 1986. We had the Soviet nuclear reactor at Chernobyl exploding in April of this year. The Space Shuttle Challenger blows up after taking off. Mike Tyson becomes the youngest heavyweight champion in history. The first case of mad cow disease is recorded in England. The first Goodwill Games are held in Moscow in July of this year. And smoking is banned from all public transportation in the U.S. and I think in Canada too. So there's no more smoking on airplanes and charter buses and stuff like that.
And some notable TV events from 1996 include Fox introducing its Fox Tracks Glowing Puck during its telecast of the 46th National Hockey League All-Star Game. We had the Phil Donahue Show ending after 29 years on the air. And at this point in history, more than 1 billion households worldwide now owned television sets, and Animal Planet and Discovery Civilization was launched. A popular toy release from 1996 was the Tickle Me Elmo. Some technical breakthroughs of the year include Dolly the Sheep, the first mammal to be successfully cloned from an adult cell. It was born in the Roslin Institute in Scotland. Deep Blue, which was a chess computer, defeated the chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov for the first time. And a Swedish man named Goran Kropp reached the Mount Everest summit alone without oxygen after having bicycled there from Sweden. And Viagra, a treatment for erectile dysfunction, is patented by Pfizer. Some big news events of the year included the United Nations adopting the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. This treaty banned all nations from testing nuclear explosions above or below ground for any purpose, military or civilian. Kofi Annan was appointed head of the UN in this year. And Prince Charles and Diana, Princess of Wales, get divorced. And we also have mad cow disease breaking out in Britain.
As far as news and events from 1986, I think the Soviet Union, or Russia now, but I think they had quite the year. They had, obviously, Chernobyl explosion, which a lot of people know now was quite the big deal.
I think people now realize that it was a lot bigger than at that time, because I think the Soviet Union was trying to cover up a lot of it.
And they also launched the Mir space station in the same year. And then, which is weird to me because this wasn't in the miniseries of Chernobyl or anything, but they actually had the first Goodwill Games in Moscow.
Oh, really?
Which took place in July, and the explosion of Chernobyl happened in April of that year. So it was probably quite dangerous for, I think it was like 3,000 athletes that went to Moscow to compete in those games.
Right.
So I wonder if they even knew about that at that time. And I thought it was interesting in 1986, the first case of mad cow was recorded in England. And then for you in 1996, a big case of mad cow disease broke out.
That's right.
That year. So
10 years apart.
Toys, Tickle Me Elmo, I remember that doll, kinda. I mean, obviously I wasn't into toys at that point that much. I was never into dolls, really, so.
Yeah, but you remember them being in high demand, kind of.
Yeah. Elf came out in 86. That was a show I really enjoyed. Oprah, I didn't really watch. I think she was kind of popular probably in Chicago. Like she had her own TV show in Chicago.
Right.
But it became national in that year. The Omnibot 2000, a lot of people probably don't know or don't remember. That was kind of a toy I really wanted. It was a little robot that played cassette tapes.
Oh, okay.
And it's kind of weird how, I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I remember people smoking on airplanes and stuff like that. Obviously, I didn't because I was, young, but I didn't realize it was that early that they had banned smoking on public transportation. I thought it might have been a little later. But it's also weird, a lot of airplanes, you can still see the ashtrays.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I didn't start flying until I was about 5 years old, but I remember seeing the little trays in the armrest.
A lot of flights still have them today.
Yeah.
Or some of the older planes, anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, the 1986, I was only 2 years old at the time, so I don't, obviously none of this really struck me at that time, but I remember learning about stuff like Chernobyl later on, and I think the Space Shuttle Challenger blowing up on TV, that's like one of the most insane things.
I forgot about that.
Because I remember hearing like that one of the astronauts on that Challenger
was a teacher,
and like they had all her students kind of like sitting around like in anticipation, like, oh, there's our teacher, she's going up into space, and then the thing just blows up into smithereens, and it's like, oh my god, like can you imagine how dark and like shitty that would be?
Actually, I forgot to mention that. That was one of the biggest events that I do remember from my childhood.
Yeah. Did you see it on TV, like live, or? I
was in my elementary school, and all the students were brought into the gymnasium, and they rolled out, this, tube TV on a rolling cart type thing.
Yep.
And I think they probably just originally put it on to watch the launch.
Yeah.
And then that happened, and I remember just being in there watching. I didn't really, not to sound bad, I didn't really care that much at the time.
Bet most...
I was young.
Yeah, I bet most kids didn't even understand.
And I was just glad not to be in class.
Yeah.
I do remember, like they say, at least say for the John F. Kennedy shooting, it's one of those events where people, you can say, where were you when this happened?
Like 9/11 and stuff like that, yeah.
So I do remember that. But that was a really big event for me that I do remember.
Yeah, that and Chernobyl, I mean, those are the ones that stick out for me. As for the 1996, I remember the glowing puck. I'm not a big hockey fan myself, but obviously I had a lot of friends coming from Canada who loved hockey, and they thought this was kind of like really ridiculous that they had to put this on.
Yeah, I'm a huge hockey fan, and I didn't like it that much.
Prince Charles and Diana divorcing. I remember a lot of people were kind of devastated by this because their wedding was like a huge deal.
Yeah, their whole life was kind of followed a lot from the 80s up until that point.
Yeah. But yeah, some pretty big events for both years.
Of course, there's a lot more music, movies, and events from both 1986 and 1996. So feel free to let us know about your favorites and any of your memories from these specific years in the comments below, wherever you find this podcast.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you regarding these years and get your feedback. Now let's move on to the main topic of this episode. It's time for Battle of the Decade.
3, 2, 1.
Battle of the Decade.
Fight.
I must break you.
So for the Battle of the Decade in this episode and our main topic, we'll be fighting it out on which music genre was better, The 1980s hair metal or the 1990s grunge?
Round 1. Let's fight.
Choose your fighter.
So the music genre known as hair metal was more like a pop style version of metal or heavy metal, which started off in the early 80s, mostly out of Los Angeles. It was also known as glam metal due to the long, usually crimped out hair and guys wearing a lot of makeup, or guys in bands wearing a lot of makeup. Hair metal was like pop music due to its catchy riffs and hooks, and a lot of it was kind of just repetitive and had similar formulas for every song, and it was a lot more radio friendly. That got played a lot more on the radio at the time as opposed to heavy metal. Almost every hair metal band would release what is known today as the rock ballad on each album. Hair metal bands included such bands as Motley Crue, Def Leppard, Rat, Poison, Twisted Sister, Quiet Riot, Skid Row, Warrant, Whitesnake, Wasp, Van Halen, Cinderella, Aerosmith, Dokken, Scorpions, and Guns N' Roses.
Grunge is a rock music genre and subculture that emerged during the mid-1980s in the Pacific Northwest U.S. state of Washington, particularly in Seattle and nearby towns. The word grunge is American slang for someone or something that is repugnant, and also for dirt. The first association of grunge was with the grinding, sludgy sound of Seattle rock music. Grunge was commercially successful in the early to mid-1990s due to releases such as Nirvana's Nevermind, Pearl Jam's 10, Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger, Alice in Chains' Dirt, and Stone Temple Pilots' Core.
Round 2. Let's fight.
Tail of the tape.
So hair metal had that look and catchy riffs and songs at that time that kind of everybody was into, and it was just, easy to sing along with and stuff like that. Just catchy tunes. It came in near the beginning of the music video popularity with MTV and Much Music, and was known for its fantastic live performances and concerts, which allowed for bands to showcase in their music videos at that time. A lot of the hair metal bands had singers that could really belt it out and were really good singers. Even some of them, I think, were like classically trained in opera and stuff like that. There's a lot of the, singers that could hit those high pitches and stuff, like Sebastian Bach from Skid Row, for example. I think he was trained in classical opera. A lot of the musicians were very talented and very good with their instruments, from bass guitar to drums to guitar players, and of course, again, the singing. It was so popular that a lot of hair metal is known as classic rock today. Concerts and again live shows were great, and an event with fantastic live music. It was just a show for a lot of these bands compared to, let's say, modern music or grunge in that essence. Like, they had the pyrotechnics and just really great bands that played live. Like, grunge is kind of basically was metal bands, and say some hair bands took off the makeup and
Threw on a flannel.
didn't get dressed up anymore. It's kind of like girls, that grew up a little and became moms and
Yeah.
gave up. And their stage, a lot of them might have been okay live, but they just didn't have that whole show presence of pyrotechnics,
A spectacle.
lights.
Yeah.
So hair metal was great music, great musicians. They had a lot of great songs that came out of that genre, and I still listen to a lot of it today.
All right, and grunge music fuses elements of punk rock and heavy metal, featuring the distorted electric guitar sounds used in both genres, although some bands performed with more emphasis on one or the other. Like these genres, grunge typically uses electric guitar, bass guitar, drums, and vocals. Grunge also incorporates influences from indie rock bands such as Sonic Youth. The lyrics are typically angst-filled with introspective, often addressing themes such as social alienation, self-doubt, abuse, neglect, betrayal, social and emotional isolation, and psychological trauma and a desire for freedom. Some of the reasons why I appreciate grunge is because I feel like the lyrics are a little bit deeper. They're a little bit more introspective. I like the sound. I think Nirvana is probably one of the greatest rock bands of the 1990s. Kurt Cobain will definitely go down along the same vein as, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, people like this. He's obviously also in the 27 Club, one of those rock musicians who died tragically at the young age of 27. And I still listen to grunge to this day. I really like the sound, and I love the music.
Round 3. Let's fight.
Counterattack.
All right, and I enjoyed a lot of grunge, or the grunge genre too. Grunge was kind of like a slow fade in from the hair bands, and bands like Guns N' Roses eased into the 90s. I think Guns N' Roses is actually one of those bands that kind of was that transformation point from metal to grunge. Like Guns N' Roses are kind of considered a hair band, but by the end of that band's career, they were still had the long hair and stuff, but they didn't wear the makeup and dressed down a little more like what grunge became.
Mm-hmm.
Bands like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, or more specifically Eddie Vedder and Chris Cornell, I thought were some of the best musicians of all time. Chris Cornell was one of the best singers of all time. I love Eddie Vedder. I'm not a huge Pearl Jam fan, but
you appreciate him as a solo artist?
Everything he does. Yeah.
Okay.
Grunge was good, but it was a bit too raw and unpolished. Concerts weren't as good, as I mentioned before. The musicians weren't as good. And there wasn't many bands to listen to in comparison to hair metal. Like, there were so many hair metal bands, even, shitty bands from that, but there were just so many to choose from, compared to grunge anyway. So the music, I don't think grunge music was as good as hair metal. The look wasn't as good, and definitely the live performances weren't that good. I've seen a lot of grunge bands. I've seen some live myself. They just weren't very good live.
Mm.
A lot of people love Nirvana, and like you said, you think, it's one of the best rock bands of all time. I don't think they're very good at all. And a lot of their live performances are pretty shitty. Like, the music sounds awful.
Mm-hmm.
The only band I really enjoyed live that was grunge was Alice in Chains.
Mm.
Hair metal, there were just so many good bands to choose from in comparison to grunge. I mean, grunge, I think there's less than 5 bands that I considered to be good. You can count all the really decent bands on one hand type thing. So hair metal was just better due to that.
Okay, and some of my thoughts on hair metal. I mean, sure, some of the bands played fast and with technical skills, but that was just guitar pyrotechnics, in my opinion. It lacked the soul and tried to replace it with flash. I thought it was a watered-down version of the 60s guitar heroes. I thought the songs were often about partying, sex, and drugs. I mean, that's cool, but doesn't really have a deep meaning that resonates with people after the song has ended. These dudes kind of dress like women for shock value. I don't think there's really, much substance to that. It wasn't really led by a youth finding their voice in an ever-changing world. I thought hair metal was kind of more of like a marketing ploy from the beginning, and just another example of corporate greed run amok in a mass market eager to eat up whatever they're fed. So those are some of my thoughts on hair metal.
Round 4. Let's fight.
Final round.
And lastly, and in this final round, the reasons why I think hair metal was better than grunge. Once again, hair metal had great singers and musicians and compared to the grunge era, even though Adam might not think that way based on what the last thing he just said. There were a lot more rememberable songs from the hair metal and the 80's genre. Again, much better live performances than the grunge bands that I saw anyway. Higher quantity of hair bands leading to a lot of kind of shitty bands, but also a lot more quality bands and choices compared to the 90's grunge. A much higher level of musicianship than grunge. Even though I enjoyed both genres of music, hair metal played a much bigger part in my life, and I enjoyed it a lot more. And that is why I think 80's hair metal is better than 90's grunge.
And some final notes on grunge. I'm going to say that grunge lyrics developed as part of a Generation X malaise that reflected that demographic's feelings of disillusionment and uselessness. I thought grunge songs about love were usually about failed, boring, doomed, or destructive relationships, so it had kind of a darker tone, but again, more introspective, a lot deeper in my opinion. I also like some hair metal. I'm going to say Guns N' Roses really sticks out for me, but I think some of the other bands you mentioned, a little too cheesy for me, and that's probably just my personal opinion. But those are some of the reasons why I thought 90s grunge is far better than 80s hair metal. Remember, you can vote on which genre of music you thought was better in the poll in the above top right corner here on YouTube, or on any of our social media at 10 Years Apart Pod, or at our website 10yearsapart.com.
And finally, on this episode of 10 Years Apart, we're going to look back at a 1980s clothing fad that was known as Underoos. Could they make a comeback? Why did they fade away? It's time for Would That Fly Today?
Would that fly today?
Underoos, a clothing fad that started in 1979 but was most popular in the 80s. Underoos are fun to wear. That was their slogan. Adam, do you remember Underoos, and did you wear them?
I think Underoos were a little before my time. As you said, they were popular in the 80s. I may have worn them as a toddler, but I obviously don't have many memories from that early in my childhood. So I don't really recall wearing this kind of underwear. How about you, Scott?
Underoos were actually a big part of my childhood. I had Star Wars Underoos and Superman Underoos. I actually went out for Halloween one year and dressed up wearing my Superman Underoos over my clothes as part of the costume. I remember every kid wanted them and feeling good myself knowing that I had my C-3PO underwear on underneath my clothes. And I remember it being very popular with both boys and girls. Why do you think Underoos faded away?
I'm going to say probably due to superhero movies kind of fading away, like during the 80s. You had the end of the Star Wars trilogy before the prequels arrived later on. A lot of these superhero movies like Superman and stuff, they kind of came to a conclusion sometime in the mid 80s, late 80s. And I think, before the arrival of these MCU movies like Iron Man, Captain America, like superhero it wasn't a very popular style of movie, by the time the 90s arrived. Why do you think Underoos faded away?
I don't know if Underoos completely faded away. Like, they still might be around now, I'm not sure. But they obviously weren't as popular, say, as the 80s. I think there was a big gap between the 1980s and the superhero genre, like, say, Marvel, or the Marvel world is today. Obviously, as I grew older, I grew out of my Underoos, and guessing it became a fad in that way in terms of myself. It's more important to feel and start to become an adult. And, if you're wearing Underoos by a certain age, it was kind of childish. Underoos were based off pop culture at that time, and a lot of that pop culture for kids kind of died off with the 80s in terms of entertainment and movies. Anyway, do you think Underoos could fly today?
I think Underoos could definitely fly today because of the incredible popularity among today's youth with these MCU movies and also the DC movies, but more so Marvel. I mean, kids nowadays, they really love these Marvel characters, these Avengers characters. And each of them seems to have their favorite one, whether it be the Incredible Hulk or Captain America or Iron Man. So, yeah, I think Underoos could fly today. I think a lot of kids, shopping with their parents, they'd probably see them in places like Walmart and they'd say, I want Captain America underwear. So, in my opinion, I think Underoos could definitely fly today. How about you, Scott? What do you think?
Right now, I'm not sure. I don't understand why they didn't try, or if they even did try to make a comeback when the Marvel universe kind of started, like around 10 years ago. I think kids would have loved their Iron Man Underoos, and it was even referred to, I think, in Infinity War when Iron Man calls out for Spider-Man the first time. I think he called them Underoos, or, yelled out Underoos. So they had their chance to make a comeback if that was if that was in the plans type thing, but I don't know if they did. And even with adults today and the popularity of like cosplay and stuff like that, I think it would be fun to have in the bedroom. I think they should make Underoos for adults too, if they don't already. I think Underoos could fly today and could do well, but think they would be doing even better if they had started a few years back. But I also think DC is going to do well, in the coming years and in the future with their movies. And the new phase of Marvel, who knows where that's going to go. So yeah, they still have a chance. So why not try?
Also, give us your feedback on Underoos in the comments below. You can also share with us your memories of Underoos on our social media at 10 Years Apart Pod or at our website, 10yearsapart.com. Underoos, did you have them? Would they fly today? Yes.
Well, that's it for this episode of 10 Years Apart. Thanks for listening, and you can now help us out by helping us decide which decade's music genre was better, hair metal or grunge. Just head over to our website at 10yearsapart.com or any of our social media at 10 Years Apart Pod and vote right now. Leave us your comments and thoughts below wherever you find this podcast.
Join us again next week when we talk about which decade had the best arcade game. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast here on YouTube so you never miss an episode. If you came across this episode and enjoyed it, please hit that like button. Subscribe to us here on YouTube for the latest videos, and don't forget to share. Sharing really helps us out.
And once again, find us at 10yearsapart.com or any social media at 10 Years Apart Pod. Stop by, vote, and let us know some of your stories from the 80s or the 90s.
Remember to like, subscribe, share, and leave us your comments wherever you found this podcast. And thanks again for tuning into the past with us here on 10 Years Apart. Hit that thumbs up button below if you like this video of 10 Years Apart. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more episodes on the 80s and 90s. Vote on this episode's main topic in the top right corner or at 10yearsapart.com. Leave us your comments on the 80s or 90s. We love hearing from you. Plus, get more great videos like this video right here. Like, subscribe, share, and thanks for watching 10 Years Apart.